child will never reject a parent. Only a child that was brainwashed and conditioned by an adult will inevitably reject a parent. Today I want to talk about the vulnerable adult abuse and the system's failure to protect them. In recent years, cases of vulnerable adult abuse have surfaced more frequently, revealing a deeply troubling pattern of exploitation and neglect. These adults, who are often elderly, have disabilities, find themselves caught in a system that promises protection but often fails to deliver. Despite laws on the books designed to safeguard their rights, vulnerable adults remain at the mercy of unqualified investigators, apathetic agencies, and worst of all, the very family members or guardians tasked with their care. In South Carolina, there is a specific crime addressing the abuse, the neglect, the exploitation of vulnerable adults. This law is supposed to serve as a shield, protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Yet, when families seek justice, they're often met with the frustrating reality that, officials dismiss these serious crimes as mere civil matters, pushing families into a lengthy and expensive court battle instead of criminal investigations. The Department of Social Services, DSS, the agency meant to intervene, is riddled with unqualified investigators who completely lack the training and expertise to handle complex cases involving financial exploitation, emotional manipulation, and physical abuse. Despite their claims of protecting vulnerable adults, DSS often falls short, leaving families feeling abandoned by the very institutions designed to help them. The sad truth is that guardians or family members are frequently the abusers in these cases. Studies show that vulnerable adults are most at risk of harm from those closest to them, trusted relatives, caregivers, court-appointed guardians. According to the National Center on Elder Abuse, approximately 90% of elder abuse is perpetrated by family members. Financial exploitation, emotional abuse, and neglect are the most common forms, yet they remain underreported, poorly understood by all of those tasked with stopping them. The court system, instead of offering a refuge for vulnerable adults, often becomes another arena where they're exploited. Family court cases rife with accusations and power struggles can spill over into probate court, where guardianship battles unfold. And in these courts, vulnerable adults are often treated as mere subjects of litigation rather than individuals with rights and needs. Judges, overwhelmed with caseloads and lacking specific training in elder or disability law, may grant guardianships without fully exploring lesser restrictive alternatives. This legal tool, intended as a last resort, is all too often wielded as a first response, stripping vulnerable adults of their autonomy, independence, and rights. It's devastating to them. So, what is a guardianship? In essence, it's a court-appointed arrangement, where an individual, often a family member, sometimes a professional, takes control of the personal and financial decisions of a vulnerable adult. Guardianships are meant to protect those who are incapable of making decisions for themselves, but they are also among the most severe forms of intervention. A guardianship can remove a person's ability to decide where they live, how they spend their money, who they see, and even what medical care they receive. It's a sweeping loss of civil rights, akin to a life sentence. It should only be imposed when no other lesser restrictive options exist. Last resort. The impact of a guardianship on a vulnerable adult is profound. Imagine suddenly losing all control over your life, the right to make even the most basic choices about your day-to-day existence. Studies have shown that those under guardianships often experience feelings of hopelessness, depression, and a profound sense of loss, complete loss. In some cases, they're isolated from loved ones, prevented from making phone calls, text messages. They're financially exploited under the guise of, I'm going to protect you. Guardianships are supposed to be a last resort, used only when all other options have been completely exhausted. Yet, way too often, they are imposed without thorough consideration of alternatives such as supported decision-making, power of attorney arrangements, and so many other protective measures that allow vulnerable adults to retain a level of autonomy. These lesser restrictive options can provide the necessary support without erasing a person's rights and dignity. The sad reality is that once a guardianship is in place, oversight is minimal. Court-appointed guardians often operate with little to no accountability, and abuses within the system frequently go unnoticed. Vulnerable adults may be isolated, exploited, and even emotionally abused by those meant to protect them, while the courts look the other way. The systemic failure to protect vulnerable adults is a crisis that demands urgent attention. We must advocate for better training for DSS investigators, stricter enforcement of existing laws, and a more robust oversight of guardianships. Above all, we must push for reforms that prioritize the rights and dignity of vulnerable adults, ensuring that guardianship is truly only a last resort and not a convenient tool for control. Every vulnerable adult deserves to live with respect, autonomy, and the protection of their rights. It's time for the agencies, the courts, and families involved to do better, to stand up against abuse, and to listen to those who cannot speak for themselves, and to ensure that the vulnerable among us are not just protected in theory, but in practice. Thanks for listening.